Welcome to Author's Ideas, a production of JR Global, an MJR production. This series is based on the recent Oxford University Press published book, Global Business in the Age of Destruction and Distraction. As a part of their Global Business series, Gaurav Rastogi joins J.R. Klein and Mahesh Joshi in examining and exploring the disruptive nature of today's world, and introduces ideas for learning how to cope with disruption and remain relevant. Here is your host, J.R. Klein.
Today we're going to think about remote attention deficit. This unplanned, unwanted, and unexpected pandemic event did more than increase the level of conversation, but forced workers and theorists into the middle of the future. What at one time was a unique, quirky, kind of fun thing became the primary work model, and remote working was no longer a dream, but it was a reality. The attraction of remote work's dreamlike quirkiness became isolation, and its sense of excitement often gave way to depression. The early observations of increasing creativity, efficiency, and productivity were often reversed by long hours, lack of discipline, and burnout. Remote working is not a bad thing. Its demonstrated improvement in productivity and employee satisfaction is a salient and achievable outcome. What the pandemic crisis did was to take the remote work concept and throw a health crisis, a financial crisis, a supply and demand crisis, and an unknown situational fluidity on top of it. Workers were not just focusing on work, but on health and safety issues, not just on the worker, but on families and fellow employees. The forced discovery was there's a danger in neglecting the physical separation of work from the rest of life. The success of human organizations and workers in the future will be how the concept of learning, unlearning, and relearning is understood and applied. Observing the trends in change and actively adapting to them is not the key to success. It is the key to survival. The idea of coevolution with technology is not just adding technology into a business and expecting that everything will work. The addition of technology eliminates jobs. It changes the duties of jobs. It changes the nature of the work culture. It forces organizations and individuals to unlearn and relearn the routines, processes, and the evolution of work is continuous. Work was one time a 9-to-5 routine. For the majority of the last 100 years, it was the norm. It had defined boundaries with a beginning and an end. With the addition of computers and cell phones and smartphones and cloud-based infrastructure, everything is pervasive with 24/7 access expected. Hardly any industry exists where the expectation is not looking at emails or related transactions outside of business hours. The nature of work has changed. The effect of technological change goes beyond the observed pressures on business systems and a workforce. It has a similar effect on the nature of the systems themselves. At one time, for example, elevators or lifts had attendants that drove the elevator from one floor to another. The same experience today only takes a touch of a button. The elevators had changed, and the elevator operator position had disappeared. The nature of almost every job has changed dramatically because of the infusion of technology. Business scholars and pundits have spent decades speculating about how the workforce would change as technology's disruptive influence continues to play out. One of the changes discussed in those conversations was the concept of working remotely. The emergence of the cloud workforce was the harbinger of the idea, and even in its infancies was fast beginning to change thinking about work in place and the foundations of the workforce model. As repetitive tasks were increasingly the domain of automation, the future of work was a topic of much debate. As the speculative conversations about the inevitability of remote work have become the current reality, and continuous reinvention of the workplace makes it essential that workers must constantly reinvent themselves, the next rational question becomes, how can workers cope in a highly technological, rapidly changing, and potentially overwhelming environment? We'll think about that next time.
Thank you for listening. If you are interested in more of the author's ideas, look for their Oxford University Press published books on global business, wherever books are sold. If you are interested in contacting the authors, they can be reached at info@jrglobal.co.